Okay. Yeah, I appreciated the words of Mark's prayer. The whole idea is that we want to learn, we want to grow, and we want to go to heaven. And it's kind of refreshing that I had a conversation with a person that's saying how much they've been appreciating the teaching they had been receiving via the TV, and then wanted some material about how to become a Christian and about the church. And so, I mean, it's just encouraging that people want to learn, and we want to learn. Now, we're on the H, the lesson number 6 sheet that I sent you guys. It went all the way through S to give you an idea, and we got through G last week of the list of different parables, and just wanted to summarize and glean some certain things of what Jesus was trying to get across to the type of audience that he was dealing with. Well, this week we pick it up in Luke chapter 10. Many of us are familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, what sparked this one in the context, if you guys are familiar, you had a lawyer who said, Jesus, which is the greatest commandment? And, of course, Jesus talked about loving the Lord and then loving your neighbor. And then he talked about, well, who's my neighbor? And then he told them the story of the Good Samaritan. And so this is just an example of how somebody's got some interest or is confused about something or wants to know. Maybe even there are sometimes those ulterior motives of trying to catch you in something. But you guys are familiar with the parable. We'll probably read some of the other ones as our class unfolds tonight. But most of us are familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And if I were to ask you to just give me a quick summary, or what's the main point you think Jesus was trying to get across with that parable of the Good Samaritan? What do you think he was trying to get across? Having compassion. I like that. Okay. Anything else? EJ?
No matter who it is, somebody needs help. You don't bite your tongue. You help them. Yeah.
In other words, you don't play favorites. As a matter of fact, that whole concept of equality should come through. Oh, that's on other people. Is it yours, Mark? Yeah. Yeah. Because of all people who should have stopped to help, right? The Levite and the priest should have stopped. Would you have? You had a Samaritan. And what was the significance of a Samaritan help? Jews hated each other. Yeah. Yes. It's like you just don't expect that to happen. And it was a powerful lesson to drive that point home, as you guys are mentioning, of that willingness to show kindness. And somebody used the word a moment ago, you're not really going to show kindness unless you have compassion.
I was going to say, I think a lot of times, especially on Jesus said in the second commandment, the second is great. In addition to loving the Lord your God, to love your neighbor. Well, they were looking for a narrow definition of neighbor. And this parable dispelled that.
Yeah. I mean, this is why we have to learn, guys. You want to teach your friends, you learn how Jesus uses something that's just going to go to the heart of the matter. You're trying to justify yourself of not helping certain people. And he comes back with a parable that basically points it out that, look, there are no excuses for not showing compassion when you're in that position. And you are to love other people. And again, just a great way that our Savior taught, that we're still using today. Of course, there's no excuse for us not to help. Here's a short one. So why don't we just go ahead and read this one? Tina, I'll let you just read this over in Luke 11. If you'll turn over to Luke 11, we'll turn along and follow with you. This is really verses 5 through 8 of Luke 11.
And he said unto them, which of you shall have a friend, and go unto him at midnight, and say to him, Friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine has come to me on his journey, and I have nothing to set before him. And he will answer from within and say, Do not trouble me. The door is now shut, and my children are in bed. I cannot rise and give you bread. I say unto you, though he will not rise and give to him because he is his friend, yet because of his persistence he will rise and give him as many as he needs.
All right, now, this little illustration is right in between what? What's it in between?
Oh, about the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah, teaching them how to pray, of course. And then he follows that up with the idea that, if you ask, if you knock, if you seek, in other words, so this whole idea of prayer and Jesus trying to teach an important lesson about the friend that comes at midnight is just basically teaching us what?
Boldness and persistence in our prayer.
There you go. I mean, you just don't give up. Now, there's always a danger with parables, right? Jesus wasn't telling people that, do this, the Lord will help you even if you're being a pain in the neck to him. Is that really his point? No, his point was, if this guy's going to get up and help, not because he's a friend, but because he's being persistent, well, how much more our God will be willing to help us, because he loves us and cares for us. And to me, one of the most powerful points within this about prayer is go ahead and say it. Go ahead. People say, well, God knows what I'm thinking. Does he? Hey, does God know what you're thinking, Matt? So why would he, if he knows what you're going to say before you even say it, so why even say it?
I mean, you still need to show that. I mean, technically, he knows you still want that, but you still need to show that effort on your part to, make it, even though it's already known to him. You know what I'm trying to say.
I know what you're trying to say. Yeah, but that's a part of it. It's the idea, Mark.
I was going to say, I think a lot of times when we go to God and we ask him to demonstrate faith, we believe in him. We believe in his ability to give us what we need.
Okay. And, he has that ability, and you're going to have to show some humility. You're going to have to, Tony?
I was going to say respect.
And respect that is there. It's like, guys, husbands and wives, do you know your husband or wife loves you?
Still want to hear it though.
Yeah. And for them to actually say it. The fact that God knows, even what I'm going to say before I say it, but the point is, he wants us to do it because you put forth the effort. It's like that old story when you preach on prayer, the guy who gets so comfortable, has this prayer on a plaque on the side of the wall, and as he jumps into bed, he says, God, them's my thoughts. There they are. Let's just do it quick and easy and not give any thought to it, where God actually wants us to. Go ahead.
Well, I think the key word you were saying is the humble. You need to be humble. When you ask anything, you're putting yourself in a humble position.
Right. Now, again, let's look at the master teacher again. What's he doing here? He's teaching, about prayer. And then he talks about this story about this friend that comes at midnight. What are you doing that for? Because I'm wanting people to understand how persistent we need to be in our prayers. And how that we need to go to the Father. And like he said in verse 9, so I say to you, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open unto you. He wants us to be aware of that. And so he's just expanding on the thought, which again is a great tool for you and I to be mindful of when we're trying to get our point across. Remember, you can make the point, but you have to, you can make it more clear. But remember how our first class started with last week when we talked about the purpose of parables. And again, the purpose?
To illustrate a spiritual lesson.
Yeah, but there are two things that would come from the purpose of the parable. Two things. You can remember? To conceal and reveal.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Now, how do you... Because I want you to remember that. What's the conceal and reveal? What do we mean by that?
Those that are seeking will see what the point is being made, and then those that are just kind of like testing him or not really caring, it'll be almost too deep.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Matt, that for you and I, who might be spiritually minded, we'll say, wow, that is so simple. And yet Matt used that expression. I liked it. For the person who's not spiritually minded, it's too deep. It's too deep for them to see. Too deep. There's really not. Well, yeah, because you're not spiritually minded. When you're carnally minded, you're not wanting to learn, especially if you're trying to catch him in his words. It's not going to. You're not going to see it, which I love. Because going through these parables teaches me as a teacher. You make it perfectly clear, people are still not going to see it. They don't want to. Now, those who want to will. And that's just a powerful lesson for us. Okay, let's move on from there. Over in Luke, we're there. We're in the 12th chapter. Is another one. The rich fool. He was addressing somebody in the crowd. Let's give you a little bit about this in Luke chapter 12. In verse 13, one of the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Well, we kind of know what this is going to do. Now remember, Jesus isn't just teaching his followers. You got these people out there, and they got issues. You've got co-workers, and they've got problems in their lives, and they're wanting you to side with them. And obviously, this guy's wanting Jesus to side with him. Tell him. Do families ever squabble over inheritances?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man, I'm telling you, just divide families. You just see a storm coming, right? And you could see where somebody would want you to side with them, especially if you're in a position of authority. Tell them to divide it with me. Well, he goes on and talks a little bit about beware of covetousness in verse 15. And, of course, verse 14, what have I got to do with this? But he tells the parable of the rich man that yielded plentifully. Now, if you guys recall this story, did he have any success, this guy? Yeah. So what did he decide to do?
Build bigger barns and store so he could store more.
And then what did he do?
He tore down the other one.
Yeah, and then what did he do?
Retired.
Yeah, sit back. Okay? So, now again, if we're going to learn about Jesus, here's a guy who says, "Hey, Lord, tell this man to divide the inheritance with me." And then he tells this story. Well, let me just tell you about this rich man who is yielded plentifully, and he tore down, and he built up bigger, and he's sitting back. So, why do you think Jesus told this parable to this guy?
Well, to focus on the spiritual, not the physical.
Okay, that's true. Anything else come to mind of why he brought that up? You're basically talking about the very same thing, Janet, when I say, he's telling him, where do you store your true riches? You get your priorities. And the person is going to sit back. What's going to happen to this guy eventually? He's going to die. He's going to die. And you're not going to take it with you. So often in this world, and Jesus is doing this with his parables, guys, you got to think beyond. He's using these physical stories to, as you guys know, physical story with a spiritual meaning. A lot of it has to do with being prepared for the hereafter. Dan.
Smile on this one. There's a lot of irony in what we covered previously, talking about how God takes care of the sparrows, so he will certainly take care of you. And then this story opens with a guy saying, but here's this this inheritance. Make sure it's divided fairly with me. It's like Jesus has to go, all right, let's try this again a different way.
Exactly right.
Same basic message.
And doesn't it illustrate what we've been talking about a moment ago, where people don't want to see it? It's like I could just see this guy after Jesus tells this story about this rich man, and go after it's over with. Yeah, okay. Well, you would tell him to share that inheritance soon. You're not getting it, and that's what happens when, like he mentioned in the previous verse before that story about covetousness. We might use other terms. What's another word we might use for covetousness today? Somebody might be what? Greedy, materialistic. You know, the emphasis on I got to get as much now. That's going to prove to God that or to myself that I've really made it. Okay? And so again, store your treasures in heaven. Main point, trying to drive home. And then, of course, you have in Luke chapter 13, verses 6 through 9. And David, why don't I let you read that one? Luke chapter 13, just as verses 6 through 9.
He also spoke this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. Then he said to the keeper of his vineyard, "Look for 3 years. I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree and find none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground?" But he answered and said to him, "Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears fruit, well. And if not, after that you can cut it down."
All right. Of course, the previous verses, Jesus starting out, people, you know, that they need to repent or they're going to perish. And in verse 3, pointing out that certain people had died in an accident. And Jesus had to make the point. But you think they're worse sinners because an accident happened to them? You know, people think that way sometimes. Bad things happen to good people. And good things happen to bad people. So again, he goes into this parable, and obviously the barren fig tree is driving home what particular point?
Chance of repentance.
Yes, but it goes just a step further.
It was a sin.
Yes. Okay. But remember, Jan, when a person comes up out of the waters of baptism, one way ticket to heaven? Why not? He just got forgiveness of sin.
That he could not follow God's law.
You've got to bear fruit. You know, the fact of the matter is you've got a tree there. Hey, looking good. Tree's looking good. All right. It's growing. It's sucking up those nutrients out of the ground. Okay. So when is it going to bear fruit? Cut it down. Well, no, let's just put some more fertilizer on. You know, I almost see patience there also brought about where, you know, we as God's people, we got to be bearing fruit. And I could stick right here for the rest of the night. Tony's on next week, so he might not be getting into lesson number 7. He might just like stick here with some parables. But that whole idea of the bearing fruit, you guys got to, since Jesus is driving this point home, what is that? What are some examples that we're bearing fruit? How do we know if we're bearing fruit? I don't grow a banana under my arm. How do you know if you're bearing fruit?
You're teaching classes.
Teaching, right? How's this? Faith is stronger. Faith is stronger. Okay. How else do you demonstrate? You're demonstrating to yourself. Maybe people may not necessarily see it. How are you bearing fruit? My guys, because if you're not bearing fruit, you're going to be cut down. And if you can't evaluate whether you're bearing fruit, man, I don't even know if I'm bearing any fruit. So what, I can't know if I'm being faithful or not.
Are you growing in knowledge? Are you smarter now than you were a year ago, 10 years ago?
True. Yeah.
Is it when somebody is talking and you tell them they're down and something's wrong up here, and you talk about, you throw them different verses that's in the Bible and bring them up, you understand what I'm saying?
Helping others is a perfect way to demonstrate. What are you going to say, Mark?
Well, you know, the Bible talks about the fruit of the Spirit. That is it's really it's the development of you as an individual, in patience and
Let's look at it.
love.
Yeah. Galatians 5. He says the fruit of the Spirit is love. I'm in verse 22, by the way, Galatians 5. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. we look at that and we go, hey man, I got two of them. I got a couple, few. See, if we're not going to if we're not bearing fruit, I think this parable helps us understand this. What is Jesus telling his audience that if you're not bearing fruit, what's happening? Yes, that's one thing. Yes, but remember what he talked about here.
You're wasting space.
You're wasting. Have you ever heard the expression dead weight? What do we mean somebody's dead weight? What do we mean by that?
They're not being productive.
Yeah, you're there. And it's like other people are having to carry you. You know, it's like, do you ever try to carry somebody and you say, can you at least put some weight on your legs? You know, somebody who's dead weight is a little different than somebody who's kind of helping himself and you're trying to help them along. It just makes it that much harder. And sucking the nutrients out of the ground, does dead weight hurt a local church? Hey, wait a second. If I'm living faithfully for the Lord and this person's living faithfully for the Lord, but this brother over here is dead weight, how does that brother affect you?
Brings the congregation down, I think.
Okay. It hinders its full potential, is the point. We're a body, right? And we do affect one another. Yes, I can't do your work, but you not doing your work can make it burdensome. Go ahead.
Well, and if you're spending so much time with dead weight, you're not helping other people, the church growing.
It's true. It's like this guy. He comes and he's expecting fruit. He says, hey, there's no fruit here. Cut it down. Well, let's put some fertilizer. Okay, we'll put some fertilizer. I come back and there's no fruit. It's gone. And I almost get this idea that there are times you got to move on, Matt.
Well, also, with that reference, it's eventually, a babe in Christ obviously needs help, but eventually they should be able to stand on their own. If I'm still having to change his diaper when he's 15 years old,
you got trouble.
That's a dead weight I'm carrying around. That's a lot more trouble, a lot more time than I'm having to spend here than I am over here. And it's the same thing with Christian. If there's somebody that's been a Christian for 10, 15 years that they haven't grown any, we're still spending the basic times, basic things with them.
Yep.
It's time we're wasting there that we could be, over here with actual new Christians, people we're trying to convert, that type of thing.
That's exactly right. And when we're bearing fruit, it gives that stability. It makes the church strong, is what we're talking about here, and everybody's doing their part. Moving down to Luke chapter 15, verses 3 through 7, you guys know about the story of the parable of the sheep, the 99 and the one that wandered away. That's in 3 through 7 of Luke 15, and Jesus is telling this story. Why? I mean, you've got the 99. He leaves the 99 and goes looking for the one. And so, what do you think he wants the audience to understand here? Guys? Every soul is important. Okay? Every soul is important. Now, not only is every soul important, but he's trying to get us to see that when he returns, what happens? They're rejoicing. Now, should you be upset? Boy, this reminds us of the other parable it's the very next one, by the way, in the same chapter, Luke chapter 15. I think we'll just couple it together with the story of the prodigal son, right? Because the prodigal son, you leaves, and then he comes back, and what was the attitude of the elder brother? He's not happy about it. Now, that's not what was happening here, but you want to understand that the 99 should have been just as happy, not only with the owner, but that one is returned. So, within all of this, with both of those parables, the prodigal son and the 99, every soul is important. Every soul is valuable. That's the point that Jesus is trying to get across. Why do you think why do we need to know this? Why do we need to know this?
Because people turn their back on the church and they turn their back on God all the time. In some cases it can leave the
people that are left to kind of pick up the pieces and clean up the mess, and in some cases, depending on the severity of it, potentially hold the local congregation together. Well, if that person wants to come back, we shouldn't be, spiteful of them, of look what you did before, and look at the trouble you caused. Like, it should be hey, we're glad you came back around, welcome back, that type of thing, as opposed to hey, you left and kind of left things in shambles and attempted to divide this local congregation. You're not welcome back here. That's an exciting thing, because now they're back in the fold again.
Mm-hmm.
But the 99 need to put as much effort into the growing back.
James 5:19 and 20. When somebody wanders away from the truth and you, at your spiritual, bring them back, right? And the other, I think the whole idea is that there is that longing. There is a difference between the prodigal son and the 99. In the story of the prodigal son, did the father go looking for him?
No, he was constant in waiting for him to return.
Yeah, he kept his eyes open, right? And which tells you, in this story, that sheep got lost, right? And when he was found, he wanted to come back. This guy went away. He wanted to be gone, right? He wanted to be gone. You can't bring somebody back who doesn't want to come back. EJ?
I was going to ask a question. Can that be similar to everyone else's burden, because somebody drops, I won't say they drop out, but if they're not happy and you just don't see them, and you go and talk to them and show them some things in here and examples.
That's it. We use the
like
expression.
Job lost everything, but God gave him everything back.
We use the expression, nobody slips through the cracks, right? In other words, so when somebody is missing, we know where they are. When somebody needs attention, we go to them and we try to help them. That's exactly right. But I'm going to tell you something. I have gone to people's homes in the past who made it perfectly clear, I don't want to come back. That's where this one starts coming in. Because you don't always know, right? You don't always know. Like that's James 5. You got to go. You got to try, Matt.
But see, I also think like that scenario, I think that's kind of where it ties into the last parable with the tree is, you go out, you always want somebody to come back, but Jesus tells him with the tree, if it's not bearing fruit, you got to cut it down, and at some point you got to cut ties with whether it's withdrawal or whatever it may be. You can't constantly exhaust yourself if they're not willing to meet you. You always want them to come back.
Yep.
If they call you up and say, hey, I want to study, you're there in a heartbeat.
Yep.
But you can't exhaust yourself worrying about this one thing that's just clearly not panning out or bearing fruit.
It's true, Matt. And I see the wisdom of, again, Christ the master teacher, not just a one-dimensional in his teaching, because there's things that are taught in this one that were not taught in the parable of the prodigal son. I have gone to congregations, I've moved to places, and they give me a list of all these members that they've withdrawn from, and they spend all their time and effort of just going and trying, and they don't want it. Why don't you go to people who somebody else who might want it? It's so draining, and I think that's what comes into play here. If people don't want it, Jesus made it the point, you don't cast pearl before swine. We make it perfectly clear the door is always open. We love them, we care for them, Janet.
And I think we also need to keep praying for them.
Absolutely. There's a difference. The prodigal son, the father who was in the field and saw him coming, to think that he wasn't wanting him to come, to think that he wouldn't be praying for him would be a miss. Tina?
I'll relate this. My dad always tells stories, and he always relates it so it's personable, so I'll tell one on myself. When I left the church, I fell away from the church. Several people contacted me, and they tried. I didn't want to come back. So they left me alone. Periodically, my father would send me a letter, because he didn't come chasing me. He didn't come knock on my door, but periodically he would send me a letter. Sometimes I would open the letter up and it would say, I'm still praying.
Right.
That's all he would say. Love your daddy. And if he hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't be where I am now. So what we need to remember as Christians, we do everything that we can for them, but then there's a point where we have to walk away. We can't maintain a friendship with fallen away Christians and go have dinner with them because they forget that we disapprove of what they're doing. Right. And if they've accepted me, I don't need to go back to church.
Right.
Because if Dad had just accepted me as a fallen away Christian and acted like everything was fine, do you think I would be here? Doubtfully.
Well, see, here's the point. And here's the big picture. That if somebody doesn't come back, like the prodigal son, if he doesn't come back on the father's terms, but if he comes back and says, when he hit rock bottom and came back and says, hey, I'm out of my money now, I want to come back home. He's not sorry for what he's done. You just brought dead weight in. Because he's not going to be on fire and being faithful. If you bring them back on the wrong terms, you're not helping them. You're not helping the church. You want them to recognize, and that's what I love about Christ and His life and His teaching and using the parables of trying to help people understand souls are important. Coming back to the Lord is there. Then we get into Luke chapter 16. And we read about, I did a sermon on that recently about the unjust steward. So we're not going to go through that one because that was talking about the serious planning that needs to go in for our future. Remember the unjust steward? He says, how much do you owe? And he cuts him a deal because he knows he's going to be fired soon. Obviously, God was not approving of dishonesty, but He loved his shrewdness. And he talked about how that the people of this world seem to be wiser in certain areas than Christians. And what we mean by that is there are times when then the zeal of religious people can put to shame the zeal of Christians. And we just need to learn that lesson. There's a lot that we can learn by looking around us. And that's why Jesus tells a story like that to try to help His followers understand that there's more expected out of us than just being here and not being in the building down the street. There's more to it than that. We don't believe what they believe, okay, but there's more to it than that. You don't worship the way they do, okay, but there's more to it than that. What is it? Our righteousness ought to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. And so, Jesus is doing a terrific job of trying to cover all these different aspects in trying to get us to learn what's expected out of us. In Luke 17, guys, let's go over there. I'll get Janet to go ahead. Janet, did I already give you one to read? Okay. In Luke 17, 7 through 10.
And which of you, having a servant plowing or tending sheep, will say to him when he has come in from the field, come at once and sit down to eat? But will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper, and gird yourself and serve me till I have eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink? Does he thank the servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I think not. So likewise you, when you have done all those things which you are commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what was our duty to do.
All right. And of course, the first part about this was in verse 5 and 6. The apostle said to the Lord, increase our faith. And the Lord said, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be pulled up by the roots and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. And then we get into what Janet just read. And of course, when you go through that, guys, and I think the answer is in verse 10, Jesus is driving this point home over and over again in His earthly ministry, not just with parables, but with this parable He does, and we've touched on it briefly with another parable. What's He driving home here? What do you need? I think I heard it. What?
We don't need to do. It's our duty.
Okay. So you've used the word before, because he says in verse 10, so likewise, when you have done all the things that are commanded, you say, we're unprofitable servants, we have done what was our duty. Who says that? You can't say that unless you're humble. You can't do it. I'm just doing my job. You know, do you ever sometimes think that you're acting like a super Christian? I'm sure you don't. Are there such things as super Christians? Why isn't there such thing as a super Christian? Yeah, in other words, whatever that person's doing, that's what you're supposed to be doing. You want to medal for your job? For just that's what your job is. It's powerful because what causes us to lose sight of that? I think there's some things that can cause us to lose sight of that. Pride? Yeah, well, yeah, that's what it is. And what causes that, Janet, I think, Mark?
I think one of the things that I think makes it difficult is that really and truly we don't understand the idea of service. We live in a free society, and while there are limits to our freedom, we can still undo those we please, do the things we please. But this story illustrates the fact that ultimately we are servants, and we will serve one of two things, either God or Satan. So, we understand that servitude, that first of all, God has everything we need. We have absolutely nothing God has.
Okay.
We are totally dependent upon Him, and we can serve Him. We can choose to serve Him or not. But anything that we could do is just not like you've already said. It is a reasonable service. Period. You look at the life of Paul. You're talking about super Christian. I think most of us, in the back of our minds, might think, it might cross your mind that Paul, there was such a thing as super Christian, right? Like Paul. No, Paul was doing a reasonable service. We need to be doing the same reasonable service.
I think you said something, Mark. I'm not going to get any farther than this one tonight, but you hit the nail on the head, I think, because I've had a chance to study in other countries where people are ruled, and they understand that concept. And although not everybody we taught were quick to obey, but when we were in China, they just had that certain attitude of built-in humility because of the way they were raised. I'm not saying we don't have it here, but I'm just saying that they understand that kind of rule. And if we could understand that, and we have, hopefully we're growing and we're maturing in that area of understanding what it really means to serve. And I think one of the problems that causes that is when we're comparing ourselves to others. EJ?
I just have one last little question. Can that be similar to a job? You do your job 40 hours, 30 hours, 20 hours, whatever it is, and at the end of the week, whatever, you get a paycheck, you know what to do, and you go in and do it without the attitude of I had to, but you get a paycheck for doing that?
Yeah. I think,
similar to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you worked for it. I mean, that's what you earned, right? I'll never forget, guys, it was my Nebraska, and I finally got my green card. Shouldn't have come in earlier, but now I'm American. I can tell the stories. I can't do anything now. But we went in, and they didn't ask. But I hadn't got my papers yet. But we were out of our house, and we were moving to Nebraska. And Debbie said she was an American. They just assumed I was. And they just let us go. Well, I had to go back for my interview back to the consulate in Toronto. So I drove all the way back. And I got my green card, U.S. consulate. So I get to the border, and they pull me. I pull in there, and the guy, he made me really uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything. I'm just standing there, and he goes, "Well, you're in. What do you want? A parade?" I'll never forget that. It's like, well, no, I just didn't know what I was supposed to do. But the guy's like, what do you want, a parade? Okay, it wasn't a big deal. You just go. Sometimes we might think we wanted a big. I didn't want a big deal, but sometimes people want a big deal. Sometimes people think, and who doesn't fall into this category? Don't get enough appreciation. I'm quit, right? Come on. You do something, and if you don't get that recognition, did you do your job? Yeah, did my job. It's almost like the laborers in the vineyard. Really, isn't that kind of similar to laborers in the vineyard? Remember here, they labored all day. Hey, here's what you asked. I didn't hold back. We agreed to this. Yeah, but those guys. And the problem is, I see within this parable is that the problem comes. We're not going to just say, well, that was just my duty. We're going to say, well, I did more than he did. When we start comparing, we're going to get ourselves in trouble. That was your duty. That was expected of you. I did this today and I did this today. Somebody says, you know what? I did the laundry. I did the dishes. I went shopping. I did this. I did this. You go, yeah, that's what wives do. That's what moms do. And then I did this. I was at work today and I had to do this. And I had to run. I'll pick on this. I had to run to cash. I had to run here and I go over there and I go, yeah, that's what guys with jobs do. No, I want more recognition. I did more than most workers. That was your job. Okay? That was your job. But the problem comes when we start comparing what we've done with maybe other workers. And we really want people to think that, well, if I talk about a mom, well, I know moms that sit around and watch TV all day. Okay, that's not good. Okay? But I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this. And okay, that's your job. All right? And so I think there's just a lot to be learned here on this. Now, I'm going to give Tony the choice. He's got the sheet. And I sent it out to you guys on Monday, this past Monday. He can finish this up. There's a lot of good stuff here in verses like P, Q, R, S, and then the last one. Or you can just go on with the other one. It doesn't really matter because we've had a good study on this stuff of learning how Jesus used parables as an effective tool. Dan, we're done. But you guys can go from there. Teachers have delivered. You've got delivered. You big closing song? I'll leave it over. It's 2:31. Well, Kevin texted me. I'll take opening and do Kevin's song. Divide it up.
He did text you?
What's that?
He did text you?
Uh-huh, he did.
Good.
Yeah, on my old phone number though. I gotta let him know.
Yeah, you will. He won't.
I'll text
He's a little behind on emails.
Okay. You guys will mark your song books at number 31. Tony will be leading us in our closing song. We've got two of us helping Kevin working tonight. Tom. But first we'll sing Mark 31. Then open your songbooks to 473. 473. Following this song down. 473. There is a name I love to hear, I love to sing its word. It sounds like music in my ear, the sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. It tells me of the Savior's love, who died to set me free. It tells me of his precious blood, the sinner's perfect plea. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. It tells of one whose loving heart can feel my deepest woe, who in each sorrow bears a part that none can bear below. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me.
Evening. Good to see everybody out tonight. This is a bigger crowd than we had on at any point on Sunday, possibly. So good to see more of us back. At least a lot of people still out of town, obviously, as we mentioned. So we have a lot of people to remember. Chuck, I missed it during the start of class. Did you pick someone for the closing prayer, or are we?
Oh, he's not here either.
Okay, we will play roulette at the end of the invitation. But at any rate, it's good to see everybody here. Do appreciate the opportunity to speak briefly this evening. Go ahead and turn in your Bibles to the book of Ezra. Book of Ezra in the Old Testament, right after 2 Chronicles. Book of Ezra. While you are turning there, I'll mention that during the Sunday class, Sunday Bible class, there were some comments made about the importance of not just being a Christian, but that we should be distinct. That people should see our conduct, and they should be able to know that we are a Christian. That principle coming up, Matthew 5, 13 through 16, talking about the light, not hiding our lights and being the salt of the earth. With that in mind, let's take a look at Ezra. Specifically, turn over chapter 7 within the book of Ezra. As a brief refresher for us, Ezra was a Jewish scribe. He was from the lineage of Aaron, so Aaron, brother of Moses. So he was able to trace back his history quite a ways. So in chapter 7, verse 6, calls out that the hand of God was on him. Some different translations phrase that a little differently, but they're all giving this indication that somehow or another God was with Ezra. This is an interesting point in history with regard to the Jewish nation. They've been in exile for quite a long time at this point, originally under Babylon. Then the Persians took over Babylon, so the Jewish nation fell under that reign as well. They've been under the reign of the Persians for quite a while now, and yet even the Persians, who basically inherited Ezra's people, they can recognize that Ezra, not just that he is a Jew, but that he is active in his faith and that God is with him. So if you think about that here's just some guy in a kingdom that another group inherited, even they can see that his faith is there and it's real and it's active and his God is with him. Chapter 7 is describing contextually how Ezra was leading a group of Jews from Babylon back to Jerusalem. The Persian king who was on the throne at this time, Artaxerxes, he not only approved the trip, but he was actually helping, he was going to assist with it financially. He was helping to fund it. Take a look in chapter 7. We're going to read some verses 14 through 18 that describe, I think, the extent to which the king was willing to support this endeavor. So again, chapter 7, book of Ezra, starting in verse 14. For as much as you are sent by the king and his 7 counselors to inquire concerning Judah and Jerusalem according to the law of your God, which is in your hand, and to bring the silver and gold which the king and his counselors have freely offered to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, with all the silver and gold which you find in the whole province of Babylon, along with the freewill offering of the people and of the priests, who offered willingly for the house of their God which is in Jerusalem. With this money, therefore, you shall diligently buy bulls, rams, and lambs, and with their grain offerings and their drink offerings, and offer them on the altar of the house of your God which is in Jerusalem. Verse 18, whatever seems good to you and your brothers to do with the rest of the silver and gold, you may do according to the will of your God. So again, this is a letter that the Persian king has written to Ezra, offering him support for this endeavor that he is going to be leading these people, and not just giving them permission to go, but he is restoring the gold and the silver that had been taken from them by the Babylonians. He's giving this all back to the Jews so that they can continue this process of restoring the nation. You'll see in there, especially verse 18 is what's really interesting to me. Verse 18 again, whatever seems good to you and to your brothers to do with the rest of the silver and gold, you may do according to the will of your God. So again, if we consider the big picture here, that's fairly amazing to me. This king is giving them all this funding, and he's telling them to go and restore their nation. And he's doing this in a very open-ended way, right? He's not sending down anybody to manage them. He's not sending anyone to observe. It's just, here's the money. So go and use your judgment. That's not a dumb king. That's a king who recognized something, again, special about Ezra. Not just that he was a Jew in terms of his nationhood, but that he was active in the faith. So what did Ezra do to be known this way? How did he develop this faith to the point that it could be so well regarded by others, even outside of the faith? I think that's an interesting question for us. Take a look back at verse 10, still in chapter 7. So Ezra 7, verse 10. And again, this is one of those verses different translations will handle differently. I'm reading the New American Standard Bible. I think it's pretty reflective of what I'm trying to get across here tonight. For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to practice it, and to teach his statutes and ordinances in Israel. So again, the beginning there, he set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to practice it. So this is a concept that we see again in the New Testament. It wasn't just studying, and he didn't just want faith. It was in his heart, and then he set out and he did it. Wasn't repetition, wasn't academic knowledge, wasn't just a desire that he had or an emotional feeling. It was those two things paired, and that he did that in the correct order, right? He was seeking to learn and to adopt whatever he found in God's word. That's what he was going to live by. Same as in Ezra's time, of course. We can find plenty of people who are willing to do one or the other today, right? They're willing to give their heart to God, or they're willing to study God's word in an academic kind of sense. But we don't see very many people doing it in the way that Ezra is describing here. This is, as I mentioned, this is foundational for us as it was for him. Ezra got the order right. We look even to the New Testament, we see this same principle being laid out. Matthew 22:37 as an example. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. Setting that principle for us that we need to care about this first. We're not going to be tricked into it. We're not going to stumble into it. We need to care about God in a very real and meaningful way. and that from that we can find the right things to do. Of course, part of that love is going to be, rather, part of that love that we're going to demonstrate is an understanding what God's revealed will is. Many places we can look at to establish this. Consider, if you would, 2 Timothy 2:15, which we have covered not that long ago, describing again from a Sunday class. We should be diligent to present ourselves as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, acceptably handling the word of truth. So just as God demonstrated his love to us, we are also called to demonstrate our love to him. In a minute, I will quickly revisit some of these activities that God has called for us to do. But for a moment, let's not forget that the heart is supposed to be the foundation of these things. We need knowledge, we need action, but we need to have conviction in our hearts first. There's a conviction, like Ezra demonstrated. That's that same kind of conviction that Jesus is calling for today. So with that in mind, if you have determined in your heart that you truly and genuinely want to follow the Lord, there are some things that he's called for you to do. These things are all described as being necessary for salvation. They're not substitutes for each other, but rather they are all complementary. We're told that we need to hear that word as it is revealed in his word. We're told that we need to believe it, as described in John 3:16. Told we need to repent of any wrongdoing that we may have done contrary to it, as described in Acts 17:30. Told that we need to confess that faith that we have in it, Romans 10:10. Told that we need to be baptized, Mark 16:16. So as we wrap up some comments this evening, if you haven't followed these steps, you have an opportunity to do so this evening. To start that, though, we need to consider, is your heart set on it in the same way as that Ezra's was? Genuinely consider, do I have action to take this evening? Perhaps you have studied the word in the same way that Ezra did. You know that you haven't been living up to it. You have an opportunity to make correction this evening. Public matters publicly, private matters privately. If you feel even that you're just missing opportunities, you need a bolder faith. You need an action-oriented faith that Ezra exhibited in taking that trip. We can pray with you. We can pray for you. We as a congregation can be an encouragement to you. Whatever's on your mind, please consider these things. Make them known as we stand together and as we sing.
Almost persuaded now to believe, almost persuaded Christ to receive. Seems now some souls to say, go Spirit, go thy way. Some more convenient day on me I'll call. Almost persuaded, come today. Almost persuaded, turn not away. Jesus invites you here. Angels are lingering near. Prayers rise from hearts so dear. Oh, wonder now. Almost persuaded, harvest is past. Almost persuaded, new comes at last. Almost is not again. Almost is but to fail. Sad, sad, that bitter wail. Almost but lost.
Thank you, Dan, for the invitation this evening. It's good to see everyone here that made out for midweek Bible study. Let's remember those that are on the road to travel and those that are home fighting illness as well. Is there anything else?
Yeah, Dave's surgery's tomorrow at 6 a.m., so it's pretty serious on his eye. It's trying to prevent it from going blind. So has to do with this rat line stuff. It's pretty serious stuff. You remember?
Remember Brother Dave Dickerson calls.
And we're having a men's meeting on Sunday or Saturday, but we need to decide with the men tonight afterwards of what time is best on Saturday.
All right, is there anything else? If not, Warren, would you lead our closing prayer?
Our God, the Most High and Heavenly Father, come before you again this day. Lord, thankful once again to come together midweek, Lord. Serve you, Lord, and study your word and worship you. Always look forward, Lord, to being with our brethren this time of the week. Move forward with our lives. We pray for those that are going to have surgery, especially Brother Dave. Pray for him. We also pray for our brother and sister, Ann Bays and Mr. Gate there at Northwest. They're suffering from cancer. Be with those, Lord. Be with us as we prepare to leave this place. Never forgetting what you've done for us, Lord, through your Son and our Savior, Jesus Christ. And we offer this blessed prayer in his name.
Amen. We're not meeting.